Welcome to the Visualizing Cross-Sections in 3D webinar. Hi, my name is Drew, and I'm the Voxler Product Manager. I've been with Golden Software for about 9 years, and I'm here today to give you the lowdown on how to export cross-sections that are created in Strater to Voxler so that they are visualized in 3 dimensions. I'm going to be walking everyone through the export process a few times, and I'm going to give everyone some tips about getting cross-sections into an existing Voxler model. So today specifically, I'll be covering exporting cross-sections from Strater to view them in 3D. Show you an example of fitting the cross-section into a conceptual site model. And finally, I'll give you guys some pro tips on how to make this process go smoothly. So after the discussion of each topic, I'm going to stop for a minute or two to answer any questions. You can send your questions to the webinar host via the questions function at any time. There's a questions box on the webinar control panel under the audio section. So please type in your question and it'll be sent to the webinar host, who will then forward it to me. If your control panel is minimized, please click the View menu and uncheck Auto Hide the Control Panel. This webinar will also be recorded. So after the webinar is finished, a video will be available on our support website at support.goldensoftware.com. All right, ladies and gents, let's get started. So as all of you know, Strater is capable of generating accurate and fully customizable cross-sections that look great. However, there are times when you may need more than the standard static 2D view of a cross-section, where it would make sense to be viewing the cross-section in 3 dimensions. This can be easily done if you also have Voxler installed on your machine, where you can export the cross-sections that were generated in Strater directly to Voxler from the Strater interface, and this can be done within just a few clicks. Before I start my first example, I'd like to discuss a few things about having both Strater and Voxler installed. So first, in order to have the two applications communicate or talk to one another, both will need to be installed on your machine using the same bitness. So that means having the 32-bit versions of both Strater and Voxler installed on your machine, or having the 64-bit versions of both Strater and Voxler installed on your machine. A mix of these two are not going to work. Second, Strater and Voxler communicate or talk using COM or automation. This means that the COM model of Voxler needs to be running correctly. To ensure this, both applications will need to be installed as an administrator. And it's always good to run a quick test to make sure that a script can be ran from Voxler Scripter. So we ship Voxler with a number of pre-written scripts that are located in the samples directory. It would be a good practice to ensure that one of the scripts can run against Voxler before trying to export cross-sections from Strater into Voxler. So this is my pro tip number 1, is to make sure Voxler scripts can run before exporting cross-sections from Strater. So I'm going to go ahead and run a quick test here by opening a script from the samples directory and running it in Scripter to ensure that the COM is registered correctly with Voxler. So as you can see, I have Scripter open, and I'm going to open a sample script by clicking File, Open, and navigating to the Voxler samples which is this path you see in the open dialog. And I'm going to pick one of these scripts, open existing voxb.bis. I know this is a small one. I'm going to click open. You can see the script on screen in front of you. So I'm going to go ahead and run this to see that if we have the COM registered correctly. That was pretty fast, but you can see that the script executed, Voxler opened, and opened the file that we were expecting. So we know that these two, or the scripter and Voxler, are communicating to one another. So for my first example today, I'm going to open an existing sample file, existing Strater sample file that contains a lithology cross-section named crosssection.sdg. Okay, so it's this file right here. So let's take a look at the Strater project for just a moment. As you can see, there's a lithology cross-section that is already created from lithology logs that are based on rock type. Now, for the sake of reviewing how to create a cross-section in Strater, I'm going to create a new one. First, by clicking Home, New, Cross-Section View. And then I can click the cross-section, Create Cross-Section command. And we see the Create Well Selector dialog. In this dialog, all the wells in this section are going to be the ones that are used to create the cross-section. And I'm going to rearrange this list a little bit. First, by clicking minimum. That gets me down to 2 wells. I'm going to highlight the other wells on the available wells section and click the Add button. And I don't want this well number 16, so I'm going to remove it. And so now you can see the wells that are going to be added for my cross-section. This looks good, so I can go ahead and click OK to create the cross-section. Now in the Import Cross-Section Data dialog, I'm going to make sure the table is set to stratigraphy, and the data column is set to rock unit, which is good. I can go ahead and click OK to create the cross-section. So now that we have a nice looking cross-section, let's walk through the steps of exporting this to Voxler. So first, I'm going to click cross-section, export, cross-section to Voxler. When I do so, I see the export options dialog. And we have things like pixel dimensions and document size. I'm going to change the pixels per inch to 96. And you can see when I do so that the width and height parameters are automatically changed. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Strater is asking me now if I'd like to save the cross-section in an IV format. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and click yes. But for the sake of this example, I'm going to click no. And let's go ahead and take a look at Voxler. So you can see that Voxler opened and the cross-section from Strater was automatically added to the viewer window. And we can view this cross-section in 3D. Okay, we can also do things in Voxler, like add a boundary box, add some axes. Now, before I move on to the next example, I wanted to take a brief pause to answer any questions from the audience. So I'm going to go ahead and check with my host. Looks like my first question from the audience is, are all cross-sections that can be exported from Strater based on lithology data? Or can these be based on LAS files or line logs? And the answer is absolutely. I chose lithology because this was a good-looking cross-section. But if we had a cross-section that did contain line logs, that can be exported to Voxler. And in doing so, this is a really good way to display the line logs in 3D next to the boreholes. Okay, it looks like I have another question, which is it possible to export the cross-sections to another file format, like TIFF or DXF? That's a great question. Right now, we're limited to the IV file. Voxler is based on Inventor, and the IV file is a native file to Inventor, so that's why we picked this. But we'd be more than happy to add those that request to our feature request database for future versions. Okay, it looks like we have answered all the questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to another example. So we've seen an example of exporting a cross-section from a project that only had a few wells. I would now like to take a look at a more complex project that contains a larger number of wells. So I'm going to move back to Strater and open another project. And this is from the samples directory as well. The name of this project is crosssection2.stg. So, okay, now you can see the project already has a cross-section that's been created in Strater. However, I'd like to create a new one by adding a new well selector and connecting the wells that we want to export and visualize in 3D inside of Voxler. The first thing I need to do is to switch over to the map view so we can see all of the wells. Go ahead and do so. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. You can see all the wells within this project. And if we wanted to take a look at the labels, we could do that. It does get a little bit cluttered, so I'm going to turn these off. Now, to add a new set of wells for a new cross-section, we're going to add a new well selector. So I'm going to click Map, Add Well Selector. And when I do so, you can see that the mouse pointer's changed a little. And this indicates that I'm in some sort of digitizing or selection mode. And I can now click on the wells that I want to add to create the new cross-section. So let me go ahead and do so. Just clicking on these wells here. And you can see that there is a nice tooltip next to these wells so I can see the well name. I can double click when I'm done adding the well selector. So you can see the new cross-section is going to be generated from these 4 wells. And now that I have the well selector added, I'm going to make sure that I have it selected in the Object Manager. And let's create a cross-section by clicking Home, New Cross-Section View. And then I'm going to click Cross-Section, Create Add, and Create Cross-Section. And so when I do so, you can see the import cross-section data dialog. And this conveniently has all the holes or the welds that we have selected already populated in this dialog. We've got the table selected. Again, this is going to be based on rock unit. So I can go ahead and click OK to create the new cross-section. And so, again, we can easily send this or export this directly to Voxler. By clicking the cross-section, export cross-sections to Voxler command. Again, we see the export options dialog. Our pixels per inch looks fine. We can take a look at the scaling tab as well. And we have the start and ending depth. That's great. Looks okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK and send this directly over to Voxler. Again, I could save the cross-section in IV format if I wanted to use this in another project. Great, we see that Voxler automatically opened, which is great, and we can visualize this cross-section in 3D here. We rotate it around so we get a little bit better of a view. Now I can repeat this process for other wells from the Strater project. If I want to create intersecting cross-sections, so this is pro tip number 2. Adding multiple well selectors can be used to create a pseudo-fence diagram. So let's take a look at an example of this. I'm going to move back to Strater. And then I'm going to go back to this map view again. And let's add another well selector. So map add well selector. And we've created a new well selector for these 2 wells. And then let's look at the cross section. Okay, so we need to create a new cross-section view. All right, these 2 holes are in the import cross-section data dialog. That's good, that's what we wanted. Okay, so you can see that we've created now another cross-section. So let's go ahead and export this to Voxler to see how it fits. Okay, so I can go to cross-section, export, and use the cross-section to Voxler command again. Everything looks okay on the size and color tab of the export options dialog. Start and ending depths look just fine. So let's go ahead and click OK to send this over to Voxler. So if I open up my Voxler project, what's cool is this was sent to the Voxler project that I had open. And now we're visualizing the cross sections in 3D, and you can see they intersect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process one last time so we can see another intersecting cross section. So again, back to the map view. Let's use map add well selector. And I'm just going to add another one. Just like that. I'm going to select this in the object manager. Let's create a new cross-section view. And again, we can create the cross-section. Both the holes that I clicked, or the welds that I clicked, have automatically populated the import cross-section data dialog. And we can click OK to create the cross-section. And so now I'm going to go ahead and send this over to Voxler into our model. Everything looks good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Voxler model. And of course, we can do things like add axes if we wanted to, or bounding boxes, and also additional Weld data. So now that we've seen a more complex example of how to add multiple cross-sections from Strater directly into a Voxler model, I'm going to take another brief pause. I noticed some questions have come in. I'm going to go ahead and address as many of those that I can. Okay, so the first question that I have is, can you input a fault? And I guess you're asking about Strater. That's something that's not something that we have available in Strater 5, but we'd be more than happy to add a feature request upon your behalf for future versions to support faults. I have another question. Can you send the well name and the headers across automatically from Strater to Voxler? The headers, no. The well name, sure. I'll show you an example of that in just a sec. And then I have, looks like I have time for like one more question here. Can you change the colors of the cross-section panels in Voxler? The colors that you see in these panels here are based on the colors you see in Strater, which are going to be based on whatever color scheme that you have, whatever scheme you have set. So if I wanted to change what's shown in Voxler, I would have to re-export the cross-section. But we could adjust any of these parameters in the scheme, the color, the opacity, what have you. Change the cross-section before it's exported. Okay, so if you want to make changes, you need to make them first in Strater. Okay, so let's take a look at one more example here. Okay, so now that we've discussed the workflow of exporting some Strater cross-sections for viewing in 3D in Voxler, I'd like to show everyone one last example that is yet a little bit more complex. In this example, I have opened up a conceptual site model in Voxler. You can see that on screen right now. That was generated by Joe Harrier, who's one of our Voxler power users. He's a hydrogeologist and the owner-operator of Anthropine Solutions out of Calgary. And so this model contains a number of different elements. Let's just take a look at it for a second. Okay, first we have a site map that you see on top here that has been draped over a height field. And I can pull this away a little bit. Okay. We also see that we have a groundwater surface that's based on a surfer grid as well. It's going to be rendered by a height field or a 3D surface. And I also have a number of VEC probe locations that are being rendered from the well render. You can see those right here. The data from these wells has been extracted, and then we've gridded it to create a ball render, which which delineates a brine plume within this site. Okay, that's shown here. So Joe has also created a number of cross sections that open for you for this same site in Strater. And so you can see one of these cross sections on the screen. If you notice, this is the same site map down here that's being used in this, the conceptual site model. And then we have a transect that defines this cross section. And so if we take a look at the stratigraphy table, we can see the various types of lithology that are in the area. Let me expand my description field here a little bit. And you can see that these are very detailed, and there's, as I scroll down, there's a ton of different layers. All of these have a rock unit code, which are used in the scheme. So let's go back and take a look at the cross-section. So we can export this directly into the conceptual site model. Okay, again, this is going to just take a few clicks. So I can go to cross-section, export cross-section to Voxler. And there's a little bit more detail. I'm going to scoot this over just a little. There's a little bit more detail in this cross-section. So I'm going to up the pixels per inch just a little bit to 200. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the scaling tab. And I check the start and ending Z values or depths here. And these don't really match what we're seeing right here or what's going to be in the model. So I can change these very easily just by highlighting and typing new values into these boxes. I know that these are the correct start and end depths and will be consistent with the Voxler model. So this is pro tip number 3. You can change the depth range for exporting the cross sections by changing the starting and ending values in the export options dialog, just like I've done just now. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK to send this cross section over to the model, the conceptual site model. Again, this was a little bit more detailed, so it took just a few seconds longer. Again, if I wanted to save this in IV format to use in other projects, I could if I wanted to. And so let's go ahead and take a look at this conceptual site model. Okay, so as you can see, this model's been, the cross-section's been added. And you can see that it has exported these well names as part of the IV file. So that goes back to the question that was asked in the last section. And this really complements the conceptual site model and adds the lithology information for the area. So I'm going to go walk through this export process one more time using another Strater project that Joe created for this exact site. So I probably won't go through as much detail as I did for the last exports, but please just watch how I go through it. So I'm going to go back to Strater. I'm going to open up another cross-section from Joe. Now, before I export, I'm going to go ahead and turn off some of the elements that I don't want to have in the resulting IV file or cross-section in Strater, such as the well labels or the depth log. So what I can do is I just go ahead and turn these off. And maybe delete any text that might be in there that I don't want. Okay, so I can go ahead and send this over to Voxler again. I'm going to change the start and end values here in the export options dialog to be consistent with the Voxler model. Then I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and let's send it on over. Okay, so here is our new cross section. And you can see that the elements that I turned off there are not part of my export here. So you can see that I do not have this depth scale or any of the labels added. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up one last time. It looks like we're getting close to the end time here. I'm going to address any last questions I have from the audience as time permits. Okay, the first question I have, and I think I know what you're saying here, isn't there an option to export the cross-section only from Strater? Yes, there is. So I've got Strater back open, and that's a really good question. So if I go through the export process again, in the export options dialog on the scaling tab, we have this option here to export cross-section only. This will remove everything, including the wells you see with inside the cross-section, and export those to Voxler. So really good question. You don't necessarily have to turn the depth log off and other elements if you want to use this option. So good question. And then I have one last question here that says, how do you handle varying elevations in TSC? If we look here, we can see that this does vary. And let me give you a little better view here. And as you can see, this cross section here that we exported first does use some varying elevations, and then fits with the wells just fine. And let's also see the ground surface. So you see in the conceptual site model, everything does respect the varying elevations and fits together quite nicely. Okay, so that concludes my presentation of the Visualizing Cross-Sections in 3D webinar. Hopefully everyone found the information I covered today useful. Now, if you have any additional questions on what was covered today or anything else Voxler or Strater related now that the webinar is concluding, we're here to help. You can call our technical support line or email your questions, probably even better, to voxlersupport@goldensoftware.com and stratersupport@goldensoftware.com, and we'd be happy to answer any of the questions you have. Now, again, a recording will be posted shortly on our support website, and as always, Thank you very much for your time.